Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you for that overly generous introduction. I'm very humbled by that, and frankly quite moved that so many of you would come out to welcome me and my favorite oldest daughter to this great and important place, to Governor Wilson and Gail, to John Hybush with the foundation, to the trustees who are gathered here, to my former colleague, Congressman Gallegly. It is a joy, it is a privilege to be in Reagan country. It really is. I'm grateful that so many of you would come out, particularly some of the young people who are here from local schools. And I've just in the last few months gotten used to bigger crowds. It comes with the opportunity that I was afforded a little more than 6 weeks ago to run and serve as the next Vice President of the United States of America. Well, John, things have changed for me a little bit. It wasn't too long ago. I was running up to an event in Rushville, Indiana, and the fellow who'd organized it had it in the local school auditorium, and I was a little bit late, as I was a little today. And I was racing past him, and there were just 3 people on the front row. And I said to him, did you see there's just 3 people in there for my speech? And he said, yes, sir, I saw that. And I said, well, didn't you tell him I was the speaker? And he said, no, sir, but I'm going to find out who did. So thanks for coming. This is very, very, very humbling to me today. It really is. I want to speak today about 2 men. One who has inspired my life in so many ways that it makes this very moment very humbling to me and more than a little bit emotional. And one who has become my friend and is inspiring a movement across this country that will make America great again. But before I do that, let me just express a word of appreciation to all of you who have supported this extraordinary place, all that you do to support the Reagan Library, the memory of this good man and this extraordinary couple and this family. I just said to a few members of the board upstairs that for me this is my second visit here. It was about 10 years ago that I brought Charlotte and Audrey and Michael and their mother here, and would you join me in thanking all of the patrons who are here today for keeping the life, the work, the mission, and the legacy of Ronald Wilson Reagan alive for future generations. Thank you so much. The hospitality here has been overwhelming, and I really do want to begin. I like to open the old book every morning, and one of my favorite verses is that if you owe debts, pay debts. If honor, then honor. If respect, then respect. And more than anything else, I'm here today, first, to pay a debt of honor and a debt of gratitude to someone whose example, whose eloquence, whose broad-shouldered leadership in so many ways has inspired my small life and will continue to inspire whatever contributions I'm able to make to the life of this nation. We came here because I wanted my children to get a better look at this man who is now a part of history. But I probably only told them about 1,000 times that I actually met Ronald Reagan. Okay, 1,001. The opportunity I had in 1988, I was a 29-year-old candidate for Congress. We got invited out to the White House. Governor, it was probably just a photo op, supposed to be. But I was standing there with my new bride, Karen, my wife now of 31 years, and we were waiting to go into the blue room where President Reagan was waiting in one of those gold and blue chairs. And, the political people had told me I should talk about something in Indiana, that we needed a bridge or we needed a road. But I just looked at Karen and I said, this man's the reason I became a Republican. And I said, I'd just like to say something to him that I could tell my grandkids. And Karen just looked at me like she still does and just said, speak from your heart. So I walked in and I shook his hand. For all the world, I felt like I was talking to Mount Rushmore. But he set me at ease, I guess like he always did. And he sat down and he said, Mike, so how's the campaign going? And I said, well, Mr. President, I have something I'd really like to just tell you. And he said, well, go ahead. And I said, I just want to thank you. I said, I want to thank you for everything you've done to inspire my generation to believe in this country again. And for all of my life, for the rest of my life, I'll always believe that in that moment, the 40th President of the United States of America blushed. And he said, well, Mike, that's a very nice thing of you to say. It was an incredible moment for me because in that moment I saw real humility. And before I leave you today, I'll share what the rest of the conversation taught me. I think in this moment of what Margaret Thatcher said in that message at the National Cathedral where I and Elton had the privilege to sit and to pray on that sad day. Margaret Thatcher said, quote, we here still move in twilight, but we have one beacon to guide us that Ronald Reagan never had. We have his example. Ronald Reagan's example informed my entire political life, and it informs it still. His ideals inspired me to leave the party of my youth and become a Republican like he did. I don't know really what it was that made the connection with Reagan. I was a young Democrat. I was the Youth Democrat Party coordinator in my hometown in 1975. Kind of a community organizer, if the truth be told. But there was something about the man. My grandfather immigrated from Ireland. I was named after him. And I don't know if it was the fact that he was an unambiguous Irishman, his Midwestern roots, but he inspired me. I started my career like he did in radio. I worked in radio in the state of Indiana. And I would go on to serve in the Congress with the likes of Elton Gallagher. I often tell people if I only had 12 years left to live, I'd want to live it as a member of Congress, because that was the longest 12 years of my life. The truth is, it was a great privilege to represent Indiana and to fight for the very things. I felt like I was kind of a late arrival to the Reagan Revolution on Capitol Hill. I'd run in 1988, but I wasn't elected to Congress for another 12 years. But when I got there, I met up with other Reaganites like Elton Gallagher, and we worked shoulder to shoulder for all the principles of the Reagan Revolution: a strong military, less government, less taxes, less regulation, and traditional moral values. And it was my great honor to advocate those things. But I'll also tell you, as governor of Indiana, he inspired me. When I became governor of the great state of Indiana, I made a deeper study of California's history. And you could thank this great governor in the great tradition of great California Republican governors. Governor Wilson, I really am honored to have you here. Thank you so very much. But I looked at Ronald Reagan's season as governor, and I saw his commitment to pro-growth policies, to lower taxes, to education reform, and I saw him as a solutions conservative. And he inspired me in the state of Indiana still. My predecessor in the state of Indiana actually worked for President Reagan. helped lay a foundation of fiscal responsibility in the state of Indiana. And after I became governor, we were able to roll our sleeves up, pass the largest state tax cut in Indiana history, the largest increase in education funding, more than $2 billion in funding for roads and bridges. We now have one of 12 states with a AAA bond rating, and more Hoosiers are working than ever before in the state of Indiana. Those Reagan principles still work when you put them into practice. And I can promise you, it's exactly the kind of leadership that Donald Trump is going to bring to Washington, D.C. when he's elected President of the United States. Okay? But it is really remarkable to think of the times in which we live today. It's remarkable to think 36 years ago, Ronald Reagan crisscrossing the country as my family and I and Donald Trump and his family have the privilege of doing, building a movement that historians later hailed as that Reagan Revolution. Today we look back and it all seems so obvious, doesn't it? So clear-cut that the Republican Party and millions of Democrats would make the decision to unite behind a leader we now regard as one of our nation's greatest presidents. But at the time, as most of you in the room know, it was a little bit different. Back in 1980, that was hardly the prevailing view. Not by a long shot. The smart set in Washington, D.C. mocked and dismissed that California governor in many ways. He was referred to as a simpleton by some. They said he was little more than a celebrity and an entertainer who entered politics late in life. Sound familiar? Truth be told, initially, Reagan even made some inside the Republican Party uneasy. His rhetoric sounded too strident, too unrefined, and they warned of it. Then the hinge of history began to swing in freedom's direction. Soon something amazing began to happen. Unexpected. People, millions of them, started flocking to his campaign. Working-class Democrat families like the one my mom grew up in suburban Chicago. Union members, folks who'd frankly never voted in a presidential election, all began to lean in and listen to the voice and the eloquence and the common sense of this uncommonly talented man. In his voice, they heard the rare and unmistakable sound of a man unbound by Washington niceties and pretense of power. In his voice, they heard for the first time in a long time, the truth. Ronald Reagan spoke the truth to the American people, just like Donald Trump has. You know, now that's no small thing. I think honesty is the axis on which leadership spins. When you respect somebody, you tell them the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Ronald Reagan's beliefs were straightforward. They were unchanging, and they were American as the wide plains of the Midwest, where he and I both grew up. Placed his faith in a loving God, the goodness of this country, and the collective wisdom of the American people. In so doing, he set out to change a nation, and Ronald Reagan changed the world. It's extraordinary to think. It truly is. So how did he do it? Well, like my running mate, I'd say first and foremost, Ronald Reagan knew his own mind. And he had the courage and the convictions to know what he was for and know what he was prepared to fight against. You know, Michael Reagan tells an especially revealing story. It's now one of my favorites. When his dad lost the Republican nomination to Gerald Ford in 1976, as the story goes, Michael asked his dad what was going through his mind, what disappointed him the most, and Ronald Reagan replied was that he was disappointed that now he would be unable to face the leader of the Soviet Union at the negotiating table. Here's the quote. My dad said to me, Michael, I want to sit down with President Brezhnev. I was going to allow him to choose the place, even allow him to choose the room, choose the table, choose the chairs. I wanted to sit there and listen to him tell me everything the United States was going to have to get up just to get along with the Soviets. Then I was going to get up very slowly while he was talking. And I was going to walk around to the other side of the table and lean over and whisper in his ear, "Niet." Isn't that great? Man knew his own mind, and he had the courage of his convictions. You know, today we're no longer called upon to say no or "niet" to a Soviet Union, but I believe we as Americans are called upon to start saying no again all the same. I think it's a time when we should say no to weakened American leadership on the world stage that apologizes to our enemies and abandons our friends. We should say no more to the deep cuts in the arsenal of democracy and no more ransom payments to state sponsors of terror. And we should say no to a sputtering economy that's pushed millions of Americans out of the labor force, made those who were fortunate enough to have jobs to make do with less and less, and we should say no to anyone who says that the American dream is dead for the future of this country. So it's a different time and different men. But I want to tell you that Donald Trump's heart, and at the very heart of Donald Trump's campaign for president, is the same impatience, the same dissatisfaction with the status quo. And in Donald Trump's heart and on this team and in this campaign is the belief in the greatness of this country and the same confidence in the boundless potential of the American people to set things right. You know, Ronald Reagan was an actor from a small town in the Midwest, and Donald Trump is a builder from the Empire State. They are different men with different styles. A long way from Dixon, Illinois to Manhattan Island. I should know. But I will tell you, knowing my running mate, having come to know him on a personal level, I truly do believe, and I'm here to say, that there are fundamental similarities between these two men that bear reflection for all of us who want to meet this moment in the history of our nation with the same broad-shouldered leadership and common-sense conservative principles that Ronald Reagan advanced. Their honesty and toughness, and a belief in the time-honored principles that have always made America great and strong. You know, Americans know deep down in their hearts during every election, politicians pile up mountains of policies and plans, but those promises oftentimes mean nothing when they come from a dishonest candidate. The reason Reagan's bluntness ushered in a Republican landslide, I believe, is fairly simple. He meant it, and so does Donald Trump. Honesty transcends party. That's why, for the same reason, so many Democrats, or what somebody once called Trumpocrats recently, have now emerged in the wake of what we used to call Reagan Democrats in this country. They're rallying to the same clarion voice and the same truth in that voice. Like Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump has the honesty and bluntness to confront the challenges facing the American people from his first day in office. And also, like Reagan, Trump, I believe, I don't have to tell anybody in this room, just like Reagan, who was willing to walk out of Reykjavik, was anxious to lean over and say "niet," Donald Trump has the toughness to rebuild our economy and command the respect of the world. Truth and toughness are but the common denominators between these two uncommonly strong leaders. And I think those are qualities that explain why so many blue-collar Democrats and independents across the country, as well as millions of Republicans, are joining this movement. It's one of the things Donald Trump tells me most often, like when we were at the Canfield, Ohio Fair just the other day. We were on our way to the fairgrounds, and it was Labor Day, and we thought stopping by a fairgrounds would be a good thing. Now, I told Donald in the car that now you're in my strike zone, right? I mean, I know county fairs. All right? Livestock barn, get a corn dog, a lemon shake-up, and you're there. So I was briefing him on that on the way to the fairgrounds. The only thing is, when you go to the fair with Donald Trump, it's a little bit different. We arrived, and you can go look at the pictures, I won't exaggerate. We arrived on the fairgrounds, and the streets into the fairgrounds were lined 10 deep, 20 deep, 30 deep. There was no event there. People just heard that this good man, our nominee for president, would be there at the Canfield Fair. And before we would leave and we would stand on the railing of our car, both of us waving to the crowd that was as far as the eye could see, we were told that there were 50,000 people that came out to that county fairgrounds because they believe we can make America great again. They know a better deal's coming. And they also know that they're part of a movement. Donald says that to me more often than anything else. When we see those crowds, he'll look to me in those private moments in the car or in a phone conversation, and he'll say to us, this is a movement, Mike. It's bigger than us. And he says it with the kind of humility that we so admire in leaders, and I admire in my running mate. America's choice has never been clearer, I believe. The most straight-talking candidate since Ronald Reagan is running against one of the most dishonest candidates ever. Well, let me say, as I stand in this hallowed place, the American people picked a bold truth teller in 1980, and I know they're going to elect a bold truth teller in 2016. Now, these challenging times, let me reflect on the policies and then I'll close. These challenging times bear a striking similarity, I believe, to the time America faced in 1980. Then, as now, we stand at a fault line of history. An economy in decline, joblessness stretched as far as the eye can see, alarming social upheaval, and an America pushed around abroad and full of self-doubt at home. We need smart and decisive leadership to fix America's problems while there's still time. Because truth be told that in many respects, elites in both political parties, then as now, have failed to give us government as good as our people, but that's about to change again. So how will it change? Well, everything begins with security. Americans of every background recognize the common dangers that we all face. This week, it will be 15 years since 9/11. It's hard to believe. The threats and dangers have not receded. In fact, as you learned in shocking and heartbreaking tragedy here in California, they are closer and more serious than ever before. During a Trump presidency, I can assure you, we will restore the arsenal of democracy. We will restore the alliances that keep us strong and secure. And we will have a commander-in-chief, as you heard last night and heard yesterday, who will take those resources and those new alliances, and we will hunt down and destroy those who threaten our people and inspire those who would bring us harm. Donald Trump, like Ronald Reagan, will rebuild America's military. It's extraordinary to think that since 1991, our active duty armed forces have diminished from 2 million to just 1.3 million today. Our Navy has shrunk from a fleet of over 500 ships down to 272. The Air Force is roughly one-third smaller. The armed forces deserve better. Like Reagan, Donald Trump knows that we can only have peace if America is strong. And on day one of a Trump administration, Donald Trump, as he announced yesterday, will submit a new budget to rebuild our military, an active army of 540,000 soldiers, as the Army Chief of Staff says he needs. He will build a Marine Corps based on 36 battalions, a Navy of 350 surface ships. Our Air Force will have at least 1,200 fighter aircraft. We will modernize our naval cruisers, enforce our classification rules, command relevant departments to conduct a thorough review of cyber defenses, and America will once again be known as the arsenal of democracy. As the proud father of a United States Marine, let me promise you this. Our new Commander-in-Chief will support our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines with the resources and the training they need to get the job done safe and come home to us. It's probably why so many military families are supporting this campaign. It's probably why so many veterans make their way to Trump-Pence rallies around the United States. In fact, could I just ask any men and women who've worn the uniform of the United States of America, could you stand, or if you're able, or raise your hand and just allow us to show one more installment of appreciation? Thank you for your service. A strong military and a strong America, Ronald Reagan knew, makes for a strong America in the world, an America that the world takes seriously. Donald Trump and I know what Ronald Reagan knew, and that is America needs to be strong for the world to be safe. Foreign policy record of this administration has weakened America's place in the world. It's extraordinary to think of the policies of this administration and of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, to take a picture of the Middle East from the day they took office and look at a map of the Middle East today. It almost doesn't look like the same place. Civil war in Syria, the rise and rule of the ISIS caliphate, a civil war in Libya, and terrorist forces that have overrun the hard-fought gains that were secured in the last Republican administration by our soldiers when this administration took office. Iraq, Libya, the wider Middle East, the rise of greater and more emboldened Russia, a more emboldened China, its activities in the South China Sea, Russia's interventions in Ukraine. It all has a vague familiarity to it from those days in the 1970s. Then, as now, there were examples of monumental bad judgment. And also, there were examples that demonstrated that truth of history that Reagan knew, that Donald Trump knows, that weakness arouses evil. And weak foreign policy by the United States of America emboldens our enemies, abandons our friends, and those days are over, starting November the 8th. But similar to those times as well is the times that we live in our economy. The last 7.5 years, we've seen an administration whose policies have stifled the American economy. It's extraordinary to think of it. We are in the midst of the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression. We have, a few days now after Labor Day, we have the lowest labor participation rate in this country since the 1970s. Don't be deceived by the low unemployment rate. The truth is that there are millions and millions of men and women in this country who aren't counted in that number because they simply aren't looking for work anymore. And probably most heartbreaking of all, there are nearly 7 million more Americans living in poverty today than the day that Barack Obama became president of the United States. Well, their nominee, her plan, is more of the same. More taxes, more regulation, more Obamacare, and more of the war on American energy that has run our nation's economy into a ditch. Well, let me promise you, just as in those days that we celebrate and remember on these walls, we're about to elect a president who knows that the strength of the American economy is in the ingenuity and the freedom of the American people. And Donald Trump will empower the American people to revive this economy again. Donald Trump at the Detroit Economic Club, a place that Ronald Reagan used to like to speak, laid out a plan to revive our economy on those time-honored practices and principles. I always like to say conservative ideas work every time you try them. They work back in the Hoosier State, where we have more Hoosiers working than ever before, and they'll work again in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump's plan is going to sound familiar to some of you here in Reagan country. We're going to lower marginal rates on every American. We're going to end death taxes once and for all. We're going to lower the corporate tax rate so American businesses can compete with businesses around the world and keep jobs here. Reagan also knew what Donald Trump knows, and that is regulation is a form of taxation. So on day one, Donald Trump will do what we did in the Hoosier State. He's going to sign a moratorium on any new federal regulation, and he's going to repeal every single one of Barack Obama's job-killing executive orders. When Donald Trump becomes negotiator-in-chief, we're also going to have trade deals that work for American workers. We're going to make sure. Donald Trump and I both believe in free trade, but we believe in arm's-length transactions. We believe trade needs to be a win-win. We're going to renegotiate NAFTA to ensure that it works for the people of the United States. We're going to get out of these multinational deals like the TPP, and at the end of the day, we're going to hold our trading partners at last to the promises that they make when they sign a deal with the people of the United States of America. And lastly, the fact that we're running against someone who actually boasted. And I quote, if she was elected president, quote, "We will put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business," close quote. On day one of the Trump-Pence administration, we will end the war on coal once and for all, and we will unleash the boundless power of the natural resources of the United States of America. Let me speak to one other matter and then close and get to your questions. And that is on, we'll elect literally, as the calendar speaks today, on September the 8th, 2 months, November the 8th, we'll elect a president for the next 4 years. But it's so important for those of us that cherish the ideals and the legacies of Ronald Reagan to remember that while we're electing a president for the next 4 years, that president will likely set the course and direction of the Supreme Court of the United States for the next 40 years. And we need to think long and hard about that. Donald Trump, for his part, has made it clear. When he becomes president of the United States of America, from the Supreme Court on down, we will appoint to the federal judiciary men and women who will strictly construe the Constitution of the United States and not legislate from the bench. Ronald Reagan said it so well, and I quote, "The importance of judicial restraint, the belief of our founding fathers that the role of the judge is to interpret the law, not preempt the rights of the people and their legislatures by making the law." Judicial restraint, the role of the judge. You know, I've said throughout this speech that Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump had similar views on some key issues, similar ideals and similar backbone. But let me be very clear with you. After my 10 years on the Judiciary Committee on Capitol Hill, working in and around these issues for a lifetime, Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump's views on the Supreme Court are not similar, they are identical. And he will appoint justices that will make the Reagan tradition proud on our Supreme Court. And finally, one last point. You know, for too many in Washington, in the view of too many Americans, politics seems to have morphed into a rigged game of self-enrichment and cronyism. One great Democrat that I'm pretty sure Ronald Reagan admired, Harry Truman, put it this way, quote, "No young man should go into politics if he wants to get rich." Truman said, quote, "An honest public servant can't become rich in politics," close quote. Well, the Pences passed that test. Yet what do we see today? We see politicians enter office with modest means and they emerge as millionaires. Auctioning access, profiting off policies is anathema to the very spirit of public service. You know, in places like Allentown, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, Ohio, Fort Wayne, Indiana, people don't know how to work the system, they just know how to work. All they ask for is that chance. And in a Trump-Pence administration, we're going to make sure they have it. Americans are fed up with Washington's self-enrichment racket. I think that's why independents, Republicans, and many Democrats are reeling from the headlines that we see one day after another. Reagan knew what Donald Trump knows. We must have the highest standards of integrity in the highest office in the land, and we will when Donald Trump becomes President of the United States. So, 1980, 2016. Two different men, two different times, but so much seems familiar, does it not? The challenges that we face, the opportunity that we have. I cracked open that old book this morning, and I happened to land in Ecclesiastes that said millennia ago that there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. Boy, I sure hope so. But I'm here to tell you, and I'm very humbled to be in this place with you all. Charlotte and I had the great privilege of laying a wreath at the final resting place of this wonderful couple that changed our country and changed the world. It was an emotional moment for me. But I want to give you a word of encouragement as well. That something big is stirring in our country. And it's coming from the American people. I mean, the spirit of 1980 that propelled Ronald Reagan into the White House is alive and kicking again. I see it every day. I just joined this ticket a little more than 6 weeks ago, but I can tell you, campaigning with Donald Trump and for Donald Trump, I see in the faces of Americans in big cities and small towns an optimism, a determination that I think is going to turn this country around. I see it in the faces of the thousands that we meet on the campaign trail. People failed by an out-of-touch Washington elite. And I had a woman walk up to me just the other day, and she just said to me, "Thank you for running with Donald Trump. I can't wait to vote." It's 61 days from an opportunity we have to restore confidence to our people, to have America standing tall again, at home and abroad, to have an economy that's working for all of our people on a foundation of our Constitution and the high standards in public life that we all expect in this nation. But I have faith. I think we're going to do it. And it's not because of the polls. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the polls. I learned a long time ago, you get into a rough campaign, you got to turn on the television with a stick every morning. You with me? What's going to be there? But it's something else. And it was manifested in two conversations I'll close with. One with my running mate and one with the man whose name is on this building. The rest of that conversation with Ronald Reagan in 1988 happened in the East Room. I did the little photo op thing with him for that 5 minutes and got up, started breathing again. Then I walked into the East Room. My wife was waiting there with some other couples, or maybe 30 of us in the room. We were just to hold there and wait till the president departed. But he all of a sudden burst into the room. You might remember those days. He actually, I think, said, "I heard there were some ladies in here and I wanted to meet you all." Well, there was a great moment where my wife got to ask him a question. He got a few questions. He took a few questions from that little podium in the East Room. And several people asked about policies and important things. My wife raised her hand and said, "Where's Nancy?" And he really melted. Made a point to reach way over and shake her hand before he left the room. But he said something that day that I'll just never forget. So I guess a couple other people must have said to him what I'd said when I told him that I wanted to thank him for what he'd done for the country. Because before he left, he said, several of you made a point to thank me for what I'd done for this country for the last 8 years. It was August 1988. America had come roaring back. The Soviet Union was back on its heels. We were standing tall again at home and abroad. He said, several of you have thanked me for what I did for this country. And then he said, I want you to know I don't think I did anything for this country. He said, I think the American people decided to right the ship. And I was just the captain they put on the bridge when they did it. We were riding over to the convention. I think it was the night of his speech. And Donald Trump, ever the coach, ever the CEO, was sitting next to me. And he was saying to me, Mike, he said, we got a great opportunity here. We got a great opportunity for this country. And he said to me, but we're going to have to work. I felt like I was in a locker room. He said, we're going to have to go after it. We're going to have to roll our sleeves up. We're going to have to just make it happen. We're going to work. And he goes, but we get to election day, and he said, we get this thing done with the American people. It's going to be great. And there was this confidence, this lilt in his voice. And I hadn't heard that since 1988 in the East Room. In both of these men, I just want to tell you, there's so much that's different in terms of their style and their background. But at the very core, both Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump are united in a boundless faith in the American people. And that's why I know in this moment that if all of us will do all that we can to elect this good man as the 45th President of the United States of America, if we put that new captain on the bridge, I know we will make America great again. Thank you very much. And God bless you. Thank you for the honor of being here today.